Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Today's topic of this discussion starter will be the quality assurance and the academic integrity. I would like to ask you to wait maybe one more minute or two to make sure that everyone comes back in the room, and then we can start for today. I think that we can slowly start with the introduction to this session. My name is Pegi Pavletić. I'm an executive committee member of the European Students' Union, one of the organizers of this event. And today with us are Karena Maguire and Gareth Crossman, who will be giving you the presentations on this discussion starter. Now I would like to start our first introduction of Gareth Crossman. Gareth is actually Gareth is actually head of the policy and communications from the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education from United Kingdom, and he will give us his first presentation. So Gareth, I would like you also to use the floor to introduce yourself shortly and then to hold your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a 5-minute presentation, so I'm not going to spend long introducing myself. I'm Gareth Crossman, Head of Policy and Communications at QAA. I head QAA's academic integrity work, and I chair a UK-wide academic integrity group, and I also chair the working group for academic integrity for ENQA. So I'm going to speak briefly, quality assurance and academic integrity. When I talk about academic integrity, a lot of the work that we do at QA is focused on essay mills, and essay mills, as I'm sure you know, are bodies that sell it. Essentially, they sell essays to students online, and students will then submit as their own. So it's academic misconduct. We're often asked, how much of a problem is this? It's a big problem. So it's certainly a big problem in the UK. It's a big problem globally. There is some research that indicates how extensive it might be, that indicates, for example, 1 in 7 students internationally may have used essay mills. It's a market-led industry, so I think the demand is very indicative. On the right-hand side of that slide, you'll see a UK site called UK Top Writers that lists 1,013 separate essay mills, and I think that's a very conservative number. The actual number in operation is probably at least double that. But I'm going, before I move on to substance, just to let you know, there is going to be a poll at the end of this presentation. So just briefly, what QA is doing in response. This is, and it's important to point out, this is a global issue. There's no simple single solution. But what we focus on is the fact these are commercial entities. If they don't make money, they don't exist. So multifaceted approach. We've been campaigning at QA for legislation to be introduced, like is in the case in Ireland and in Australia. And the UK government has recently announced that that is going to be a legislation introduced in England that will criminalise essay mills. QAA publishes extensive guidance. Some of that is available in the resources section. We work with international partners to address a global issue, particularly QA being one of the main partners we work with. And we do campaigning work. We challenge online platforms, Google, Facebook, PayPal, YouTube, and we've said to them, these are, don't host essay mills, you're making money out of academic misconduct. Once legislation is introduced to criminalise, I think that will become a lot easier for us to persuade that to happen. But the main thing I want to talk about, and the rest of my presentation, is about QAA's Academic Integrity Charter. Now, this is a charter with 7 principles that we have invited all UK higher education institutions, so universities and colleges, to sign up to. And so far, 180 have done so. It was drafted in collaboration with academic experts, with higher education institutions, and importantly with students. It's quite simple. It contains 7 principles, quite broad principles, because they're supposed to apply from the largest university down to the smallest college, about what they can do to demonstrate institutional commitment to protecting academic integrity. Important to note, it's got no regulatory standing. This is voluntary. And we don't audit compliance, but we do expect that everyone who signs up to it will be making a commitment that the principles are mainstreamed through their academic practice and governance. And really, it's about the sector getting on the front foot, and it's about being positive, promoting and protecting academic integrity. So very briefly, I'm just going to run through the 7 principles. Firstly, everyone in a higher education institution is responsible. This isn't anyone's particular job. I mean, there might be people who have a particular role, but it's everyone's job. Secondly, and kind of connected to that, taking what we call a whole community approach, whether it's support or staff for students, support and staff support for staff, whether it's assessment design, whether it's the way in which you detect academic integrity, whether it's your procedures and processes, each of those joined up is as critical as the other. Then looking more widely, you have to work together as a sector. That's what, by signing up to the charter, you're committing to. This is not your problem. It's an institutional problem. It's a sector problem. In fact, it's more than a sector problem. Then engaging and empowering students, engaging and empowering staff, students in particular, very important. And that lastly, that you have consistent and effective institutional policies and practices to deal with academic misconduct and institutional autonomy. What that means is that it's not down to agencies, it's not down to governments. We can play a part, but it's the sector institutions that are the front line of protecting and promoting academic integrity. So I'm just going to finish off by saying we have ministerial endorsements from the charter, from governments across the UK, which is important because it's about raising awareness with politicians, getting governments engaged. I said it's not down them to solve the problem, but you need their support in order to do so effectively. So that's my 5 minutes worth. I'm now going to, there'll be a question, which will appear on your screen, which is about whether or not you think this would work in your institution.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, and thank you, Gareth, for your lovely presentation full of relevant information in these 5 minutes. Now I would like to give the floor to Karena. Karena is the head of the Stakeholder Engagement and Communications Division at the Quality and Qualifications Agency in Ireland. So Karena, I invite you to take the floor and introduce yourself shortly.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. Just following on from Gareth, obviously in Ireland, we also consider that the whole academic integrity context is certainly a global issue, and we like to ensure that we are at the forefront of discussing those issues with our international partners. It's a global issue and it requires a global response. So this really is to have a look at the efforts that QQI, as the Quality Assurance Agency, the Qualifications Authority, an awarding body in our own right, and very recently a regulator of cheating in Ireland. So we do have a legislative context for this. Just to say that the most inspiring and productive piece of work that has come out of the academic integrity work that we've been doing is in direct collaboration with our higher education institutions and our students and a whole range of other stakeholders. This development on the National Academic Integrity Network has been very productive. And I think really the thing to note about this is that the very diverse membership, which is also voluntary, has produced a very open and trusting environment where a model of quality enhancement has moved into helping institutions with self-regulation. That's actually probably the most important thing to say. So the particular advice, support, guidance, the resource developed, the tools, we'll have a look at that now, and the latest development around the policy framework. Again, just to note here that QQI is more recently empowered by the legislation since November 2019, when the Academic Integrity Network was established, to prosecute for cheating. And I suppose the focus, just to note, is to prosecute those who facilitate academic cheating through advertising, publishing, provision of services and things like that. The other thing to note on this is that although we have been working locally on the regulatory side to engage with advertising platforms and commercial cheating companies, similar to what Gareth has mentioned, anyone with online advertising, also international bodies, to try and ensure that we stop any of those particular activities that are impacting on our local environment. The other piece to mention here, I suppose, is that the national and international partnerships for us are very important in terms of staying connected with colleagues in other jurisdictions internationally that have done a huge amount of work on this. And more recently, QQI has been advising other international jurisdictions on the legislative process that we have been through and the success and impact of that. So just to have a look really at the I suppose the partnership is really QQI is working to support the academic integrity network. The higher education institutions developing resources themselves is really the core critical success factor with this, and the student engagement on the network itself, and I suppose in disseminating communication and media messages is a core part of that. We can have a look at the data gathering maybe in the discussion more closely. Just a couple of things to note here. Again, linking academic integrity to assessment is a very important piece of our work as an agency, and also providing research with regard to furthering and enhancing the discussions that the NAME network have been undertaking. The data gathering has actually commenced on a kind of a small pilot basis, both quantitative and qualitative data. However, as you will see from the resources that the network has developed, the terminology and understanding of what we mean by terms in academic integrity was really a critical first step for this. So just to maybe focus for a minute on the types of resources that have been produced. Again, similar to the charter in the QAA that Gareth has referenced, this particular network has accelerated work on these two pieces of guidance. The first one is the lexicon of terminology. So this is an important glossary so that everybody understands what we're talking about. And there's a particularly student-friendly aspect to this, because where there is a definition, many of the definitions have been taken from the European Network for Academic Integrity, but there's additional resources around some of those definitions, and a nice little addition there is a kind of a behavioral student-friendly definition to add to that, and that's on the common terminology. Both of these pieces of work, including the academic integrity guidelines, were actually launched by our minister just over a month ago. The guidelines themselves then are really working towards providing that guidance and support for institutions. So if you think of it logically, they were developed by institutions and students and other stakeholders. And as a result of that, their implementation appears to be actually quite widespread. So they're non-statutory at the moment. However, as I mentioned earlier, the model of quality enhancement feeding into quality assurance is actually proving to be quite successful. So just maybe to mention one piece of work, because we've 3 working groups and we have one devoted to communicating with students and staff, and they've produced lots of media pieces as well. This is a framework for academic misconduct that the network is working on at the moment, and this is based on an understanding of the life cycle of managing academic misconduct. So there's quite a lot of work ongoing, and the main point to notice here, it's dynamic, and all of these guidance pieces are evolving and will be reviewed frequently by the network when it comes to implementation, and supported by QQI. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Karena, for, yeah, okay. So you also have a poll question for the audience? We have a poll question,
yes. So are policymakers in your jurisdiction, are you aware if they're acting on academic integrity issues that are being raised at an international level and also at a national level? We're working closely with Gareth on that ENQA project and other European projects. And what about institutional levels? So is there evidence of any policymakers at those different levels acting on the academic integrity global issues being raised at the moment?
It seems quite varied, the answers.
Yes.
Would you say this is expected?
I would, I suppose, just working with the QAA and the other agencies on the ENQA project, I think it's the awareness of issues, I think, is something that we're we understand is the first step in this. So it's not entirely unexpected.
It's very, very interesting to see. Because I think also from the student's perspective, it always seems like academic integrity isn't so much integrated into the procedure. So it's very interesting to see that for many of them, it is kind of interlinked.
It's important to support both staff and students in that awareness campaign. Yeah. Okay.
I agree. So I thank you for your poll question as well. And now I would like to open the floor for any questions. Remember that you can ask, you can use the Q&A chat, but you can also ask for the floor, and you can directly speak to one of our speakers, which is encouraged. So if maybe I can start and like do the icebreaker. So I would like to ask one question to each of the speakers, and then maybe we can open the floor to a more elaborate discussion. So I would have the first question for Karena. Would this peer-driven collaborative approach to the development of national guidance work actually in your national context?
Okay, well, what we are finding, I think, is that this is actually quite an unusual model for us, because we are a national agency. We do have national and statutory quality assurance guidelines that apply to all vocational, further and higher education institutions, both public and private. So that's quite a broad remit. In this particular case, the first step we took was to actually engage with our providers, our higher education providers, particularly where the risk appears to be higher, the stakes are higher, the reputational damage to your national qualification system. And of course, we are the qualifications body as well. So we engaged with our institutions, and I suppose this seemed to be the most appropriate way to tackle this, a peer-driven network which has produced absolutely amazing resources. They appear to be implemented more effectively because the institutions know themselves what they're doing, as do the students that are spread across those working groups. The student representative bodies are quite active on it, and we also have students who are active on the ground. So this is quite an unusual approach, I suppose, when you're looking at a body that has a regulatory remit with, you know, quite stark legislation. But we have found that this is extremely effective. And really what I would like to know is, you know, are there participants here today, whatever capacity they're working in, do they think this would work in their own jurisdiction? Because the level of work produced, particularly during the global pandemic, has been absolutely inspiring.
Thank you for your answer, Karena. It's really nice to see that this peer support can actually develop and produce these high quality results that can also be shared by students as well. I think it's quite relevant to build from the ground up and kind of to develop the structure and the idea of the academic integrity further. I would also have a question for Gareth. If the charter is not enforceable and non-regulatory, will it really have an impact?
Yes, it will, is the short answer. The longer answer, I'd say, is actually I think it's quite important that it isn't regulatory. When you have a charter, you want people to sign up, you want people's commitment, you want this to be getting on the front foot. It's a different message when you're talking about that sort of enhancement-based approach to one where the language is one of regulatory compliance. And I think that also gives institutions greater scope and freedom as to how they are going to approach this. Their institution is unique. How they apply the principles will be down to their unique circumstance. Again, better to do so in that enhancement-based approach than through regulation. And I think also as a practical point, in order to frame, it's sometimes rather difficult to frame things in regulatory language. You know, collaboration, one of the collaboration as a theme runs through that. So that's more difficult sort of to talk about in terms of regulatory compliance. Whereas I think we all know what collaboration means. So not only do I think it has an impact because it's non-regulatory, I think that the impact is enhanced when institutions are thinking about this as what can we do together, what can we do with our students, what can we do with the sector to protect and promote academic integrity.
Thank you. I really have to agree on this. And I think that the enhancement brings much more than just ticking the boxes, which sometimes happens, unfortunately. I would then like to give the floor to another poll for the participants to participate in. And I would ask then the staff to put it on the screen. So do you think the higher education sector in your jurisdiction is taking the protection of academic integrity seriously? Okay. There are also some no answers coming in. And I think that also when we discuss the different areas in which we work in, this is specifically interesting because we all come from different backgrounds, either from the agencies, some of us are students, some of us are different organizations working in education or professors. So it's quite positive to see so many yeses, but it's also sad to see that there are also some spaces for improvement and some answers which say that actually academic integrity isn't taken seriously. And this is something I think that collaboratively we need to work on, especially coming into the European strategy for universities and building the future of the higher education. Thank you for this poll, for participation, and I think we are ready now for some questions. So we have a question by Dolet, it's a question for Gareth. So Gareth, could you please provide some data or statistics on work being done to remove essay meals content from YouTube and other social network? How hard is to accomplish it in practice?
Yeah, I think those both those questions kind of fit together. It's very hard to accomplish in practice in the UK at this moment, and there's very little data that I'm aware of which would indicate that when QAA wrote to YouTube and all the others a while ago and asked them to do this, then we got a mixed response. Some Google didn't reply, but we noticed their paid for advertising disappeared. PayPal made a commitment not to use not to allow payment for SAML sites. YouTube removed a number of videos, but I think they find their way back in. The big change that is coming in England and hopefully will then follow the rest of the UK is that soon these are going to be criminal entities. And that means that it's not just asking people to look at their ethical policies. That means that, and I think Karina's experience in Ireland has demonstrated this. It makes it easier to actually be more to be able to say you're dealing with criminal entities. Also, within institutional networks, the organisation JISC in the UK operates what's called the Janet network, and that network, all essay mills can be blocked from that network when legislation is introduced. So I have to say, it's not a solution. It's not going to get rid of essay mills, but it's one of those pieces in a jigsaw that just makes it far more difficult to operate. And finally, I'll just say that once the legislation is in place, and we are keen to work with UK governments to build that data set that will allow us to show how effective the legislation is being when introduced.
Thank you, Gareth, for this elaborate answer. And I think that we can all strongly agree that this is the way to go forward, because the academity needs to be the imperative also of our research and our work. I have another question in the QA chat. What does the policy mean for reviewers and agencies in practice? Would you check the existence of frameworks or charters? Do you use other questions? It's a question posed by Pavletić.
So I suppose I can respond to that. I suppose the main piece of work, Carl, at the moment is to ensure that there is a policy framework established by the higher education institutions, or at least that they have an opportunity to improve on a policy framework that is responding to the much more sophisticated business models of the fraudulent cheating contexts, large global companies that have actually impacted across our system. Some of the data that's been shared, I suppose, in terms of knowledge of what's happening across global systems it's very technologically advanced, and it's, as Gareth said, you close down one particular essay mill and they're literally popping up as you're shutting them down. So it definitely is something that requires a kind of a policy and strategic collaborative approach across the system, because any of those that we have tried to ensure will cease and desist from advertising locally, although that's been successful, the global access actually is an interesting problem. And we have found that the policy framework piece is something that the institutions are crying out for in order to ensure that they have the right criteria to combat and help us combat against academic fraud and help us protect the national reputation of our qualification system. It's very important to us. So they have automatically taken any policy pieces and guidance that have been produced by this network so far, and they've carried out their own evaluative reviews in terms of what needs to be enhanced. They understand, as Gareth mentioned earlier, it's a dynamic situation, so everything is open to evolving and improving all of the time, and we ensure that they stay connected to our international partners, particularly other agencies. Other agencies are acting on this because we have been talking to them around the world. We've also been approached by other international universities that want to take their own policy initiative where perhaps they don't have jurisdictional reliance on a national agency. So I'm not sure if I answered that question, but certainly we can provide more information. Delighted to talk to anybody after this session.
Thanks for answering this, Karena. We have another question from Jenny, which I will ask, but I also would encourage highly all our participants to apply for a live chat with our speakers and to ask the speakers questions on the floor. I think it would make this discussion a little more livelier. So the question by Jenny is, do you have any experience from introduction to academic culture for new students, and does it help?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the interesting, if interesting is the right word, one of the consequences of COVID and the knowledge and the fact that students were moved very quickly to remote learning, and the need to react to that actually taught some really valuable lessons, which have been introduced by a lot of institutions, and hopefully is reflected in the guidance that we've produced about what can be done and the support that students need in order to be able to deal with, you know, the drivers that might make them use essay mills. I think also, particularly as you have student cohorts arriving, certainly in the UK and I imagine elsewhere, student cohorts who are arriving into university for who, because of COVID, actually haven't really had that kind of, they've missed a chunk of academic experience, and again, that might make them more vulnerable. Now, there's lots of things that can be done, but to give an example, I think one thing that's come through really clearly is the importance of peer networks and peer support. It's not just necessarily a top-down thing in terms of, well, you know, obviously students need to be aware of the importance of academic integrity and taking action against academic conduct and what the consequences can be, but it's their networks of other students and those support networks that can be particularly effective. So what I would say is that I could sort of say a few things, but there's a lot of this sort of content is covered in the guidance that we produced, which is in the resources for EQAF. But I think probably if you're going to say what is possibly the most important thing that any institution can do, I'd say there are two things. One is to ensure that they have some institution-wide strategy, and ideally a person in post to help to have responsibility for academic misconduct. But the most important thing is ensuring that your student support networks are effective, because students do not arrive at higher education institutions with the intention of cheating.
Yeah, I agree, and I really thank you for your answer. Karena, do you maybe wish to add something?
In terms of new students, I know the communications working group on the NAIN network has been very successful, and I suppose having the student input, not just the backing of the Union of Students, the representative body in Ireland, but also having those students who are on the ground dealing with many issues coming to them, people coming for help. I think induction is a huge part of the academic calendar where they've tried to infiltrate, but also I suppose the move to online during the pandemic was also an opportunity to remind people not to move away from their academic integrity where possible, not to fall into all sorts of scenarios that look legitimate, and that's the problem. A lot of them can't tell that these resources are actually not legitimate because the model is quite clever and sophisticated. So the communications piece with students is very much informed by the mixture on our network, and that's senior academic leaders, it's students themselves, and it's also managers, librarians, a whole raft of people who can actually put their perspective in, and getting to the students actually is a priority, an absolute priority.
Thank you, Karena. And now with us, we also have Jenny, who actually posed this question, right? Do you have any reflections? Do you want to ask another question to our speakers?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear your answers. I'm Jenny Pavletić from Malmö University in Sweden. We are talking a lot at my institution right now about socializing the students, particularly the new students, into the academic conversation and and the arena for academics and that philosophy of learning and trying your ideas. And so I think I will definitely take with me these answers about the social networks that they need the support. It should be easy to do the right thing, and it should be hard to cheat.
Maybe just to add to the student communication, and again as an agency, because we have a lot of connections with student engagement activities, it's important to bring those into the NAIN as well to ensure they're linked up. So for example, we have the National Student Engagement Programme running in Ireland, and they have decided to take as part of their own engagement with staff and students for more collaborative partnerships and HEIs around communications and various policy development contexts. They've also developed they're in the process of developing a small module on academic integrity to ensure that the student representatives are also familiar with what needs to be understood in terms of the students who can fall into the wrong side of academic integrity and be led away quite quickly. So that's just another example of how connecting with the rest of your business, as well as connecting the whole academic integrity context into the quality assurance tools formally that an agency provides, and also engages with the higher education institutions, including regular data collection.
Can I just, one very final comment, I'll be very quick, is that without putting down QA's own campaigning or other organisations' own campaigning about SMLs, by far the best campaigns are the student-led campaigns, by far. And I'd say probably the most effective. So engaging students is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Jenny, also for being so brave to come to the big screen with us and to share this space. I will also read now another question that came in the blue bar on the side, but maybe someone will get the courage also to join us on the big screen. It doesn't seem to be so scary. So Marina had a question. Sorry if I'm asking the question that doesn't relate to the session, but I'm interested in how other peers, countries, quality assurance auditors handle or conduct internal quality assurance. How do you conduct internal quality assurance of the faculties, departments, in order to have a genuine feedback from the university constituents? Maybe it's not so connected, but I think that maybe we can reflect on it maybe from the perspective of integrating academic integrity into internal QA.
Yeah, I suppose much of the national guidance that is produced by an agency, particularly in the context of QQI with the statutory quality assurance guidelines, we have a core set of guidelines that is relevant for all providers across the system, and then we have many subsets developed to support and provide guidance, and that guidance informs the construction of the internal quality assurance system. This particular guidance that's been produced on academic integrity is because it's such a dynamic context, because it has been produced primarily by our institutions and their students and other stakeholders, I think is something that needs to evolve. Common terminology needs to be bedded down, and I suppose the culture of academic integrity is something the network is interested in pursuing, but without question, it's already a part of the internal quality assurance system within our higher education institutions. They provide annual reports to us every year, particularly on new policy developments or policies that have been enhanced in some way. And we are already receiving quite a lot of indicative information with regard to how they are ensuring that academic integrity policy and frameworks, supportive frameworks and tools are being enhanced on an annual basis. So there is an absolute connection. I think the point that I made earlier is this model of quality enhancement informing quality assurance. Really, it's the internal quality assurance that it is informing. And it certainly is beginning to reflect back through the formal quality assurance reporting procedures that we have with our higher education institutions.
Thank you, Karena, for this answer. Gareth, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, not much to add really. I mean, in the UK, there are 4 different quality assurance systems, one for each nation of the UK. I mean, just to take England as an example, the regulatory framework in England has recently introduced, or is proposing to introduce, academic integrity as part of the framework of regulatory compliance. That's great and it's important, but assurance and enhancement need to sit alongside each other, because, as I said in my presentation, the important work isn't about making sure that you've complied with the baseline. The important work is about making sure that you are proactive in addressing whatever manifestation of academic integrity is impacting upon your institution, and that's a different mindset. So enhancement and assurance sit alongside each other here.
Thank you very much. I think we have a few more minutes. I saw one more request in the chat, which is from Laura. I get calls and emails every day from scammers who are located outside Canada who are trying to scam me. Is there any research to indicate whether it has more impact to go after these organizations, which can pop up and disappear quickly and are probably organized crime, or with the end users, in example, students, who may be thrown out of their academic programs or receive other consequences?
Yeah, I suppose that is a difficult one, because not many of the agencies have legislative power behind going after these particular agencies. I suppose the problem as well is also, well, the data is not yet gathered, although the Australians, as Gareth said, have legislative backing, and we have legislative backing. I do understand that our Australian agency has had a success recently on prosecuting some of those high-level essay mills, but I suppose the main thing is that they can reproduce themselves and turn up anywhere else. So we do need to look at alternative ways. There hasn't been enough time to gather data on this because we're not up and running long enough. None of us are. But certainly, I think we need a global effort to try and ensure that the business model for these particular organizations that are popping up is somehow disrupted to the point where it's no longer tenable for them. But it is a problem. I mean, scamming in general, I think, has escalated worldwide. I mean, everybody is now subject even on their own mobile devices to all sorts of scams and every minute of the day. But I think what is worrying is differentiating between someone who appears to be offering a genuine academic support service to students that actually are unaware of whether this is legitimate or not, some of which are sitting on the resources section of the higher education institution's website, look legitimate in every way. Some of those scammers are a little bit more easy to identify, Laura, as we all know. We can tell now when we're being scammed on our phones even. And it's really the ones that come in many different guises, but are far from legitimate and yet appear to be very legitimate. So, but I think nobody wants to be tied up in litigation forever. We want to actually work with these companies. We want to try and be reasonable, and we want to collaborate with each other to ensure that tools are developed for detection and much more quickly. And we're focusing on workshops for providing tools for detection for our higher education institutions as well. That's another part.
Yeah, just say, I mean, if it while both targeting the bodies responsible is important, as well as the trying to stop it happening in the first place, to say what's probably more effective, it's being able to address the reasons why students are drawn to academic misconduct in the first place. And there's a myriad of those, so I've not really time to go into them. In terms of targeting the agencies, I mean, it's a very Anglo-centric term to describe something as whack-a-mole. It's that playground game where you try and hit moles on the head, and when you hit one, two others pop up. So it can be like that. So legislation is important, but it's not going to be the cure. Mention of organized crime, I think there's just something I want to mention there. This is something that is very much in the realm of organized crime. We were contacted by the Australian agency TEXA recently, who made us aware of their concerns that essay mills were embedding themselves onto institutional websites. So students were accessing those, thinking that these were legitimate services endorsed by their institution. Now, my first reaction when I heard that was thinking, that's a lot of effort to go to for a couple of £100 for an essay. But in speaking to JISC, who know about these things, the UK data agency, they say it's organized crime. What they're doing is students who believe that it's okay to hand over their details are handing over personal and financial details, which are then being sold on the dark web. Students are also being blackmailed. We're aware of that. So this is, it's not just criminality in terms of this can be a criminal offence depending on jurisdiction. This is criminal insofar as organized crime is increasingly becoming involved in essay mill use.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Karena, for such elaborate answers. And I would like now to close this session. I see that Colin had a question, but maybe, Colin, if you can send a private message to one of our speakers to reflect after this session. I would like to thank you for participation. I would like to thank also Karena and Gareth for providing us a food for thought and also a little bit of inspiration, I have to say, when it comes to some of the decisions that your agencies have taken and the approach towards different aspects of upkeeping the academic integrity.